Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Craig Malkin, clinical psychologist and lecturer for Harvard Medical School. I'm also the author of Rethinking Narcissism, which is devoted to helping you understand and cope with narcissism in all its forms in all your relationships. Today, I want to talk about healthy narcissism, what it is, what it isn't, why it's important, and what to do if you lack it. So there's a lot of information out there about healthy narcissism. One critique I often get is that there's no such thing. There's actually multiple measures of what's called healthy narcissism. And the idea really goes back to the origin of narcissism itself. The main confusion people have is that even with my writing, they say I confuse self-esteem and self-confidence with narcissism, and that is not the case. First of all, self-esteem and self-confidence are only moderately to poorly correlated with narcissism because as somebody becomes more narcissistic, their self-esteem often drops or it fluctuates. Likewise, their confidence does the same. And with different forms of narcissism, which if you haven't seen my videos or read my material on that in my book or elsewhere, I encourage you to go back and look at the different forms of narcissism. Some people who are extremely narcissistic or have some forms of narcissism, like vulnerable or covert, don't necessarily feel self-confident or have high self-esteem at all. The way you want to think about healthy narcissism and the way I bring it in Rethinking Narcissism is that it's part of a spectrum of self-enhancement. Self-enhancement has a long research tradition. I talk about this previously as well. You can also think of it as positive illusions. Really kind of a slightly rose-colored tint on view of self, world, and future. It's not realistic. And that's why self-confidence and self-esteem and narcissism are not the same at all. Self-enhancement, which can take healthy forms, and that is the equivalent of healthy narcissism, is a slightly overly positive, unrealistic view of self and often world and future. And there are any number of measures for it. There is Paul Wink's autonomous narcissism, which you can think of as sort of warm ambition. There's leadership authority on the narcissistic personality inventory. There's something called admiration on the narcissistic admiration and rivalry questionnaire, or NARC. And then there's just healthy narcissism on the narcissism spectrum scale that my colleagues and I put together, that has items like I like to dream big, but not at the expense of my relationships, and I persist in the face of failure, items like that. You can hear the flavor of it. But again, just to reiterate, self-enhancement or healthy narcissism is really about the slightly, emphasis on slightly, overly positive, unrealistically so view of self, world, and future. It's kind of a slight inflation, and it turns out it's cross-cultural. It takes different forms, say in China or Japan, where that slightly overly positive view of self might have more to do with being caring or connected to others, versus say in the Western culture where it might have to do with more striving for achievement goals. But it is cross-cultural. The reason that is so important is we also know that moderate self-enhancement or healthy narcissism actually helps people who moderately self-enhance persist in the face of failure. They give and receive freely in relationships. And according to some research by the person who really first looked at this, Shelley Taylor, as positive illusions, really goes back to a book from 1980 called Positive Illusions, where she brought all this research together. That sometimes what comes out in the research is people who moderately self-enhance may even live longer because of the health benefits of it. So these are some of the positive aspects of what healthy narcissism is. The reason it's also important is as soon as you start thinking about this idea of healthy narcissism, other things become clear, and that is that there are helpful or adaptive aspects of even what we view as narcissistic traits, some of which I've already described. And then they're unhealthy, and they do not rise and fall in perfect step with one another. So if you look at measures of narcissism and apply them to, say, politicians, particularly people who later on in life might strive to and achieve the status of becoming president of the United States, they all score high enough on many of the narcissism measures matching up with traits to be considered narcissists. That is high enough in the trait. The difference is, at its best, they don't have any of those unhealthy traits. In other words, they moderately enhance. What are some features of healthy narcissism, and as opposed to, say, unhealthy or pathological narcissism? People who score high on these measures may, in fact, exaggerate uh, and overestimate their intelligence, their attractiveness, or their ability on a task. But when judges bring that information to them, objective judges, say, rating their work, and point out, well, actually, you're okay at this, you're average, they adjust their view down. They adjust it to be more realistic. In other words, they start out kind of inflated, and then they get that information and they adjust it down to a more realistic view. Whereas people who are extremely narcissistic, they cling to that self-enhancement. This is why I view and talk about narcissism as an addictive drive to feel special. That is, having to self-enhance no matter what the cost to others. If you give somebody who's extremely narcissistic feedback that they really aren't as wonderful at something or wonderful in certain traits as they thought they were, they will attack. They will get angry. And this is one of the hallmarks of when that kind of self-enhancement turns negative or turns unhealthy. So why is this important too, as well, in terms of a lack of self-enhancement? Well, it turns out there's plenty of research on that as well, in empirical research and just how people have understood the concept for the longest time. And that is, lack of self-enhancement is a problem. In Rethinking Narcissism, this is why I arrange things from lack of self-enhancement to moderate self-enhancement to extreme self-enhancement, as we're thinking about a scale or a spectrum of narcissism. People who never self-enhance at all are anxious often, they're often depressed, they might be empathic, they might be warm, but they struggle to hold on to a sense of their own self. This is where confidence might drop with a lack of self-enhancement, just as it can with extreme self-enhancement, low narcissism versus high narcissism. And these are people who lack self-enhancement at all, are the people that I refer to as echoists in my research and in my writing. The problem is that if you struggle to self-enhance at all, that you don't have some of those protective mechanisms that will actually help with realistic self-confidence and self-esteem as well, but they also come with this kind of inflation. Where does it come from? Interestingly, what we know from the research is that people who are able to turn to others when they're sad, scared, lonely, blue, you've heard me talk about this before. In other words, people who are securely attached, who feel comfortable depending on others with a range of emotions and turning to them in mutually caring and connected ways. People who can do that also tend to moderately self-enhance. They're correlated. So to the extent that we're able to connect in these healthy ways and learn to do it, which can be a learned skill, even if we were deprived of it when we were younger, in proper context, when you have a good therapist who can help you learn to develop those ways of relating on a deeper level, self-enhancement comes with it. So even somebody who struggles with echoism can have some of those protective benefits. And a lot of times what got in the way for them, and what continues to get in the way for them, I've seen in my own practice and helping people, is that they're afraid, and they actually conflate self-confidence or pride with arrogance and extreme narcissism. And we need to tease those apart. So, for example, the pride of doing well and being able to share in that is relational. It's something to be celebrated in our relationships. It is not a moment of self-involvement. If you've done something well, if you've accomplished something, notice how if you have children, you will very much celebrate what their experiences are. And you're like, everybody is happy and like, you did such a great job. I'm so proud of you. Are you proud of yourself? That is relational. So that is all part of maintaining that kind of healthy narcissism or moderate self-enhancement. I know people have a strong reaction to even using narcissism well, but the empirical evidence is overwhelming at this point. And maybe it will help you to think about it this way instead, that it really is kind of like that inflation. But if you want to think of it simply as self-enhancement, no self-enhancement, moderate self-enhancement, extreme self-enhancement, maybe that will feel more acceptable or palatable. But bottom line, you want to be able to do some of it, and the best way to do that is to heal in relationships and be able to relate in these ways that are more securely attached. So I hope that's helpful. If you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of them, go ahead and put the notification bell on so that you receive them as soon as they come out. And I look forward to sharing more with you.